All right, let's jump right in. We're going to tackle a huge historical question today. We often see World War I and World War II as these two totally separate, massive events, but what if they're not? What if they're actually one big connected story? Let's dig into that.
So this is the big question, right? World War I was so horrific, people literally called it the war to end all wars. And yet, just about 20 years later, the world is on fire again, in a conflict that was even worse. How does that happen? How does it happen so fast? Well, the answer isn't just one thing. It's more like a chain reaction, a series of dominoes where each one that falls pushes over the next, and the next with this kind of unstoppable force. And today, we're going to follow that chain, domino by domino. So, our story doesn't start in the 1930s with all the familiar images of rising tensions. Nope, we have to go back to the very end of World War I, to 1919. This is where it all begins. This is the first domino. Just think about the state of Europe at this time. It wasn't just damaged, it was fundamentally broken. You've got entire economies just wiped out. Old empires that had stood for centuries were suddenly gone, which created total political chaos. And maybe the most dangerous part? You had this deep, simmering anger in countries that felt cheated by how the war ended. It was a powder keg, really, just waiting for a spark. And that spark came about a decade later. The next domino wasn't an army or a treaty. It was a worldwide economic collapse that basically poured gasoline on all those fires that were already burning. The Great Depression was so much more than a stock market crash. It was a collapse of hope. You can see the shift right here. All those fragile dreams of getting back to normal? Gone. Replaced by total despair and financial ruin. And here's the thing. When people are that desperate, they start looking for someone to blame. And they become dangerously open to extreme ideas. So all this desperation, it creates a kind of power vacuum. And into that void, into that chaos, step these new, radical, and really aggressive ideologies that promise to fix everything. And there's our next domino. And during this time, we see two huge political earthquakes. First, you've got the Russian Revolution, which creates this powerful and completely new kind of state, a communist one. And then, at the same time, all across Europe, in places like Italy and Germany, another radical form of government starts taking root, totalitarianism. So what even is totalitarianism? It's way more than just a regular dictatorship. We're talking about a system that demands total control. Control over the government, the economy, the media, even what people think. The individual means nothing. All that matters is serving the state and its all-powerful leader. And here's the thing about these totalitarian states. They weren't built to be peaceful. Their whole ideology was based on struggle, on expansion, on taking what they believed was theirs. So almost immediately, they start this pattern of aggression that begins to poke and prod at a world that is just exhausted by war. You can see the terrible logic here, right? It's a simple, deadly formula. Step 1, your ideology tells you that you deserve more land, more power. Step 2, you build up your military to go get it. And step 3, you just start breaking all the rules, all the international treaties, basically daring the rest of the world to do something about it. So, how did the world respond to all of this aggression? Well, they tried a policy that was meant to keep the peace, but instead it became the final tragic domino that pretty much guaranteed a Second World War. That policy was called appeasement, and look, on paper, it kind of makes sense. The idea was, okay, let's just give these aggressive countries, like Nazi Germany, a few of the things they're demanding. They'll be satisfied, and we can avoid a big war. But to get it, you have to remember how traumatized everyone was by World War I. An entire generation was lost. Leaders in Britain and France were absolutely terrified of repeating that nightmare. They would do almost anything to not send their sons back to the trenches. And this is the absolute tragedy of appeasement. The intention was to keep the peace. But the reality? Every time they gave in, it wasn't seen as a compromise. It was seen as weakness. It was a green light. It didn't calm the aggressors down. It emboldened them. It made them think they could get away with anything. And it made a massive conflict pretty much inevitable. So let's just trace that line one last time. You see how it all connects? The shaky, resentful world left behind by World War I, hit by the economic chaos of the Great Depression. That chaos gives rise to totalitarian governments, whose aggression is met with a failed policy of appeasement. Boom, boom, boom. one domino after another, leading directly to 1939 and the start of World War II. And all of this leaves us with one last huge question to think about. When you look back at this whole chain reaction, was World War II just bound to happen? Or was there one moment, one domino, maybe the Depression, maybe appeasement, that if it had been stopped, could have changed everything? It's a heavy question, and it's definitely worth pondering.